So good evening, everyone. As you know, I'm Rabbi Shankman. I am so excited to welcome Brad Aronson virtually to Washington Hebrew. We're thrilled and excited that he's here. I first met him through the Jewish Book Council, which is a wonderful organization that we participate with, and got to hear just a snippet of what we're going to hear this evening. And I want to share a little bit about Brad before we get started. But one other thing that I just want to mention, we'll be putting in the chat shortly a link to Brad's book, Humankind, Changing the World One Small Act at a Time. And you'll be able to purchase it through our WHC Mitzvah Mall, which will continue to support important programs that do the kind of work that Brad's book addresses and lifts up. And so I hope that you'll have a chance, if you have not already read, to certainly to sit down and read his book. I found it to be both like a warm hug and a huge inspiration. As I already told Brad, it may make appearances in some sermons in the future. So I'm excited to welcome Brad both through the Jewish Book Council and also our Edlavitch-Tyser Family Relations Forum of Washington Hebrew Congregation. I mentioned not only that we can purchase his book through the WHC Mitzvah Mall, but also all proceeds from his book go to Big Brothers Big Sisters. So it's sort of a double mitzvah of what we can do by purchasing his book, plus the mitzvah for yourself of just the enjoyment of this beautiful, beautiful book. Brad is a husband and a dad, and when he's holding the parenting reins, he likes to go all out. For him, that means leading an egg drop competition from the third floor window of his family's home, or heading up indoor games of baseball and hockey, and then having to explain why something else is now in pieces. And luckily, his wife, Mia, is understanding. Brad is deeply involved with youth nonprofits, and he's on the boards of Big Brothers Big Sisters and HopeWorks. Brad also teaches entrepreneurship to students in Camden, New Jersey. Everyone in his class starts their own business, which has led to many adventures in entrepreneurship. And as you know, Brad is the author of Humankind, which Forbes called the most uplifting book of the year, and I certainly understand why. Humankind is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, a USA Today bestseller, and Canadian Book Club Awards winner. And all proceeds, as I mentioned, go to Big Brothers Big Sisters. This is their real life stories, some of Brad's own experiences, and really just the sort of the ripple effect, as he calls it, and the pay it forward idea of the impact of small actions and what we can do. And as we spend so much time talking about and teaching our children the importance of tikkun olam, of repairing the world, we know that it's one small action at a time, and that each person really does have the ability to make that difference and heal and make the world whole. And so I am so thrilled that Brad is with us this evening to share what some of those small acts are, and to inspire us to continue this work. So Brad, thank you so much. And as I turn it over to Brad, just in case you did not see in the chat, there is a link, thank you, Haley, to Brad's book. Brad, thank you for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. Just typically when I talk to groups, most people have not read my book, but just to get a feel, has anyone read the book? All right, we've got Rabbi Shankman, you've read the book. All right, so good. I love it when it's fresh people, because every story I tell you tonight will be fresh. I want to start with a quick exercise. I'd like everyone to think of someone you're thankful to have in your life. Let's just take a few seconds and think about that person. Like maybe they did something small for you, they stopped by to see how you're doing, or something huge. All right, now I'm gonna do something a little bit risky at the start of the presentation, but I know you're all into mitzvahs, so I can trust you to keep on track. I'd like you to take out your phone or pull up an email on your computer and send a quick message to this person. We only have a minute, so it should be something short like, I'm really thankful to have you in my life, or I appreciate you. Thanks for being a great friend. But let's do that right now. And I'm going to do it as well. All right, I see some people have finished. And remember, we're going to keep this as short as we can. All right, 10-second warning. All right, so if you haven't finished, please put this aside and you'll have plenty of time to come back to it at the end. What's so amazing is that in under 5 minutes, each of us just made someone's day. And if you're like most people, you feel great about it. How incredible. Each of us has the power to make someone's day, and we can do it every single day. There's a lot of research about habits. And if you want to create a new habit, it's easiest if you couple it with an existing habit. What if every morning after breakfast, we sent one person a note telling them why we appreciated them? And if we wanted to really invest, instead of just spending 5 minutes, we could spend 15 minutes and send a handwritten note to someone every day. People will hang on to that forever. We're in a world where people are suffering all around us, and the news only amplifies the stress. It can make it difficult to figure out what to do. It can feel paralyzing. There's so much wrong and things are so unfair. How can I make a difference? I believe the way we change the world is with small acts of kindness. And that's the premise of my book. I want to share one of the inspirations for my book. It was the high school graduation of a mentee of mine. She went to Girard College. And yes, even though it's called Girard College, it is actually a high school in Philadelphia. And at her graduation, on one side of me sat a 70-something-year-old man. And he told me that he lived in New York, but he had graduated from Girard, and he came back to Girard every single year for graduation because the high school changed his life, and he wanted to be there to support the next generation of graduates. And there's this part in the ceremony where you sing the school song. He stood up and belted it out so proudly. On the other side of me was a woman, and she was crying. She told me that she thought her daughter would be dead or in jail. And here she was graduating from high school. The commencement speaker talked about what an amazing day it was. He talked about how the students at Girard were from areas of Philadelphia where it was expected that many of them would drop out of high school and very few would go on to college. Yet every single graduating senior had been accepted to college. He talked about how this was wonderful, but unfortunately, these students were entering a world full of negativity, where incredible stories like Girard's graduation doesn't make the media because the media is filled with so much negativity. So of course, the next day I get online, I look everywhere. I can't find a single story about Girard. So I go and I get our daily newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer. I look through every single page and there's nothing. It was heartbreaking. I felt like I was an extra in a real live inspirational movie. I just felt like I was walking on air after that graduation. And I thought anyone who knew the story would be lifted up, and boy, we could use that. And that's when I decided that if I wanted more of these uplifting stories to be out there in the world, I should start writing about them. And I was writing and meeting people, and I discovered through all these stories how it really is the smallest things that can make the biggest difference. You know, one example is Jimmy. Jimmy grew up in Flint, Michigan, and when he was in 3rd grade, all he wanted to do was fly under the radar. But it was hard for him. He was the only kid in the 3rd grade who came to school with his shoes tied in a huge jumble of knots. And that's because he was also the only kid in the 3rd grade who couldn't tie his own shoes. And he was horrified that if his shoes came untied, he'd have to ask his teacher to tie his shoes. So instead, he put up with having his parents tie all these knots in his shoes. There's a reason why Jimmy was the only kid in the 3rd grade who couldn't tie his shoes. He had something that made him very different than all the other kids. He was the only kid who had only one hand. And it was hard for him. Kids would tease him and call him Captain Hook. One of his classmates burst out in tears on the first day of school because they thought his prosthetic arm was so scary. And needless to say, it was very hard for him to fly under the radar, even though that's what he wanted. Well, one day he gets to school and his teacher, Mr. Clarkson, is sitting outside the classroom. Jimmy, I figured it out. What'd you figure out, Mr. Clarkson? I'll show you. And Mr. Clarkson turned on a movie for the rest of the class, turned out the lights, and pulled 2 chairs into the hall. And he taught Jimmy how to tie his shoes with one hand. Decades later, Jim said, I don't know if it took Mr. Clarkson 20 minutes or hours to learn how to tie his shoes with one hand. It doesn't matter. It was one of the turning points in my life. It taught me and it showed me that I could do anything I want to do if I put my mind to it. And Jimmy wanted to play baseball, and he practiced baseball. And he wound up pitching for our Olympic team and leading our Olympic team to a gold medal. And then he wound up playing professional baseball. And he said that when he was playing professional baseball, parents started showing up at his games with their kids who had disabilities because they were looking to show their kids a role model and to get some encouragement. And Jim said he tried to meet with all of them. And Jim started getting hundreds of letters every week from kids with disabilities and families who had children with disabilities. And he said that he and someone else at the ball club answered every single letter. And Jim would regularly speak at events to raise awareness and raise funds for kids with disabilities. And he told me he tried to meet with every single person he could who reached out to him. And he wound up pitching a no-hitter, which is an incredible accomplishment in baseball. He also wrote a best-selling memoir, Imperfect, which is a great read, but he really wanted to give back. And one of those kids that he reached was Nick Newell. When Nick was 6 years old, his grandparents took him to a Yankee game. And Nick told me it was amazing because he got to do a meet and greet with Jim Abbott. And it was the first time Nick had ever met anyone else who had only one hand. And Nick said, here I was. I met the pitcher of my favorite baseball team, and he had only one hand, and he told me I could do anything I wanted to do. And Nick wanted to wrestle. So he started wrestling in high school. He lost his first 17 matches by getting pinned. And if you don't follow wrestling, getting pinned is the absolute worst way to lose a wrestling match. But he got progressively better. And he became an all-state wrestler. He had school records. And then he wound up wrestling in college. He was captain of the college wrestling team. And then he started competing in mixed martial arts and discovered he loved it. He lost his first competition, but won his next 13. And he applied to compete in the UFC, which is the most well-known and the highest paying mixed martial arts league. And Dana White, who was president, said, it's hard enough to compete here with two hands. I'd be crazy to let someone compete with one hand. So Nick joined a different league and became a world champion. And Nick told me, he said, as he became well-known, parents started seeking him out. Parents of children with disabilities looking for encouragement, looking for advice about what they can do to help their children. And Nick told me he tries to meet with all of them. And he regularly speaks at events for kids who have lost all or part of an upper limb. And Nick's a busy guy, so he still competes in mixed martial arts. He started a gym where he trains people. And it's a lot of work having a small business, especially during COVID. And he's also raising a young child. And I said, Nick, what inspires you to meet with all these kids? And what do you tell them? And he said, Jim Abbott wasn't too important to talk to me as a 6-year-old. He taught me that I'm not too important to talk to anyone else. And I tell these kids they can be anything they want to be. And sometimes I teach them how to tie their shoes with one hand. Mr. Clarkson saw that Jim was bothered about his shoes, and he saw an opportunity to help. That little lesson in shoe tying had an enormous ripple effect that Mr. Clarkson never could have imagined. And I found that consistently in the people I talk to that those are the types of things that happened. Now, in writing these stories and talking to people, I also love stories about when people found something that we might assume can't turn into a positive, and they figured out how to do it anyways. So a quick anecdote I wanted to share is from Ronald McDonald Camp. This is a camp for kids who have cancer and their siblings. And it's an overnight camp for a week. The counselors get up there early to set up the bunks. And while I'm setting up the bunk, I noticed that my co-counselor brought a leaf blower. So I'm thinking maybe he's really into being clean and he's going to leaf blow our bunk every day. And I said, Jim, what's up with the leaf blower? He says, oh, I wake up the kids with it. They love it. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we'll have to see about this. And the first day of camp, when the kids arrive, you sit them down in the bunk and you go over the camp rules. You're not going to touch other people's stuff. We don't exclude anyone. We do everything as a bunk. And then Jim pulls out his leaf blower and says, guys, if you don't wake up, I'm going to leaf blow you. And the kids are like smiling nervously at each other. And then they look at me like, is this for real? I should shrug my shoulders because I think it's for real. And then as camp progresses, we have this tradition called polar bear swim, where the kids, you wake them up early in the morning, you take them up to the pool, everyone jumps in. Some kids love it. It's an adventure to wake up early and jump in the pool. Other kids hate it. They don't want to get out of bed. The pool is too cold. By midway through the week, not a single kid would get out of bed for polar bear swim. But it wasn't because they didn't want to go. They all wanted this tornado under their covers. And after Jim leaf blew them, we'd go up to the pool. No one complained. Everyone jumped in. They'd be laughing. It became a fun event. Jim could have just said, you know what? Some kids aren't going to like getting up and some kids aren't going to like jumping in the pool. But instead, he changed the whole tone of the event by finding a way to make it fun. And of course, when I got home from camp that summer, and I told my family, our son Jack insisted that I wake him up with a leaf blower. And for about a month, every day I woke him up with a leaf blower. Now, of course, kids themselves are the best at seeing things from a different perspective. They're not burdened by the decades of experience that we have. Our decades of experience make us believe things are the way they are and they can't be changed. But kids see it differently. One great example is Gabriel. When Gabriel was 6 years old, his mom, Natasha, was tucking him into bed. And she said, Gabriel, November 3rd is coming up. You're healthy. Everything is good. But that's always a sad day for me. I don't want you to worry. Everything's okay. It's just a sad day. Gabriel had been diagnosed with a disease on November 3rd. And now he was cured. He was healthy. But the day still weighed really heavily on Natasha. And Gabriel said, Mom, why can't we turn that day into a day of light, like Secret Santa Day? Here's their family Secret Santa tradition and how it got started. When Gabriel was in treatment, over the holidays, someone dropped off presents, left it on the porch for Gabriel and his sister. And there was a note that said, Merry Christmas from Secret Santa. And Natasha pinned that note up on the refrigerator. And she told me they talked about it almost every night at dinner. No one could believe that someone did this for them. They had no idea who it was. And of course, when the next Christmas rolled around, they decided that they would become Secret Santas. And Grandma and Mom and Gabriel would drive to the houses of different people in the community they thought could use a boost. And they'd leave little gifts on their porch anonymously. And it made them feel so great that Gabriel wanted to do this on November 3rd. And Natasha said, all right, why don't you tell me exactly what you want to do and I'll make a little video. And in the video, Gabriel said, I want to turn November 3rd from a dark day into a day of light. I hope everyone will please do something nice for someone else on November 3rd. Natasha sent this video to a dozen friends and family. And one friend said, could you set up a Facebook page? That way, if we do something, we could kind of type in what we did. And she says, okay, I'll set it up. Gabriel finds out, starts going crazy. Oh my goodness, everyone's going to do it. It's going to be huge. Natasha's trying to set his expectations. A lot of people, when they do a mitzvah, they're not telling other people. They do it for themselves. And we only told a dozen people. So that day comes around. And the first act of kindness, and I should also say, they asked people, if you do an act of kindness, please give a card to the recipient. And the card will say, I've done it for Gabriel's Day of Kindness. If you feel moved, please pay it forward with an act of kindness for someone else. And it also had the website address so people could go and type in what they did. So the day comes, the first acts of kindness comes from Wisconsin, then Florida, then it spreads to all 50 states in the US, then Armenia, France, Czech Republic, and 53 other countries. Now, of course, Gabriel's family also participated. They went to the hospital where he was treated and gave out toys to the children who were there. They handed out gift cards to to people who were homeless. They went to a bank that was really helpful to their family when Gabriel was in treatment and brought them donuts as a thank you. They went to a restaurant and paid for the dinner of another table and had the waiter bring over the card and say it's for Gabriel's act of kindness. And they watched while table after table after table paid for the next dinner until finally Gabriel's dad said, "We can't stay here all night. We have to go home." And they got home and Gabriel said, "Mom, is it still a dark day?" She said, "No, it's not." And he said, "Wasn't it a great day?" She said, "Yes, it was." He said, "Can we do this tomorrow?" She said, "No, we can't do this tomorrow." And he said, "Can we do this next year?" And she said, "Yes." And that's how Gabriel's Day of Kindness became an international kindness movement. And Natasha told me that she's heard from 7 other families who created their own days of kindness that are now an annual tradition to turn their child's diagnosis day into a day of light. And it was really interesting. I got to read a lot of stories from people who participated in Gabriel's Day of Kindness. And so many said they wanted to do something, but they weren't sure what to do. And the Day of Kindness gave them a reason and it gave them direction. And many of those people talked about after they did it, they were carrying it forward and integrating it into their daily lives. It's similar to the Mitzvah Day, which started in your congregation back in 1991, which has now become a large event that's a national model adopted by temples around the country. It's a reason to do good deeds, to feel the positivity from it, and then get more engaged on an ongoing basis. I've heard repeatedly when I give book talks that people want to do something, but sometimes they're not sure what to do. And they like having that opportunity where someone says, "This is our mitzvah day. This is Gabriel's Day of Kindness. Here's what you can do." So I'd like to share another story. This one is about Hilda Back. Hilda grew up in Germany during World War II, and she and her family were Jewish. So obviously there was huge risk to them. And people in their community were really upset about what was happening. They felt helpless though. How can we stop the Nazis? How can we stop the German government? But they wanted to do something. So they got enough money so that they could pay for Hilda and her family to escape to Sweden, because in Sweden, Jews were safe. And that's why Hilda wound up in Sweden. She served as a nanny to a family and then became a preschool teacher. And she always wanted to give back. And she said she especially felt like she wanted to give back to people in other countries because of how she was helped when she came to Sweden. And she found this nonprofit where she could donate $45 a year to pay for the secondary school education of a child in Kenya. Because in Kenya, primary school is free, but secondary school costs money. So most kids in poverty don't go to school. And her money wound up supporting Chris Maburu. And Chris was a student who lived in a very high poverty area. And because of her sponsorship, he was able to go to secondary school, which was different than the other kids in his village. The other kids, they had to drop out of primary school. They wound up joining their parents in the fields. And if someone got sick, there was no money for medicine or healthcare. And if someone was out of work for a long time, the family went hungry because they were living that much day to day. Luckily, Chris was able to go to secondary school. He did so well that he got a scholarship to University of Nairobi. And I should say that in Kenya, even though secondary school costs money, college is free. And then he went to Harvard. He got a scholarship to Harvard. And he graduated and became an international human rights lawyer for the United Nations working in genocide, not even knowing Hilda's background. And Chris told me that when he went back to his village, he felt so guilty. He saw his friends who were working in the fields next to their parents who didn't have future opportunities the way he did. And Chris said He wasn't any smarter than his friends. He just got lucky and got the scholarship. And because he felt so guilty, he started a nonprofit. And he never met Hilda, but one of the early correspondents from the nonprofit mentioned her name. So he named his organization the Hilda Back Education Fund to provide scholarships for kids to get a secondary school education. So far, they've provided scholarships to 900 children. And this has changed the lives of those children and their families, because when a child goes to secondary school, they can get a job with enough money to pull the whole family out of poverty. And he really wanted to meet Hilda, and he knew her name. So he pestered the Swedish embassy until finally he got her contact information. And he met her, and he told me that she became like a second mom to him. And he would see her at least once a year. She came to his village and was made an honorary tribal elder, which is a huge honor. And his nonprofit still continues. Chris said that a lot of the donations comes from kids who got scholarships. They'll send money in and say, I benefited and I want to help another kid. And then the ripple has even continued beyond there. 2 of the students who received an education through Chris's nonprofit set up their own nonprofit in Mombasa. Mombasa is Kenya's second largest city. And their nonprofit provides secondary school education scholarships for kids there. And then there's Kathleen Ismail. She was a volunteer in Ghana, and she was doing good work there. And she told me, she said, when I heard Chris and Hilda's story, I realized they're normal people just like me. I can do something. And she started a program to provide scholarships for a secondary school education for kids in Ghana. And she provided about 200 scholarships. And thankfully, Ghana then made secondary school free. So now Kathleen provides these scholarships for higher education, vocational school, and she also builds computer resource centers in high poverty areas because they don't have access. It's interesting that in an interview, Hilda said, I always wondered what happened to that $45 and did it evaporate? Well, she got so lucky in that she actually got to see what happened to it. So what can we do? There tend to be plenty of opportunities in our own circles. And I'm going to mention just a couple right now because we don't have a ton of time. One is we all know someone who's going through a rough time. And the number one thing we can do is to be there for them. We can send them a note, say, I'm thinking of you. We can just send them a book saying, I thought you'd like this book, or I thought you'd like this funny cartoon. I interviewed hundreds of people for my book. And because it's a book about these small acts of kindness that change lives, the hundreds of people had very difficult lives, which is why they needed these acts of kindness. The only thing every single person I interviewed agreed on was that being seen and being recognized with that small little note made a huge difference to them, or an article or someone reaching out. And when you're going through such an emotional time, the smallest act of kindness like that can make a huge difference. And along those lines, a synagogue in my area told me how they bake bread and deliver a loaf to members of the congregation they think could use a lift. They told me that the appreciation from the recipients is unbelievable. And it's only a loaf of bread. And it's not that people have financial issues. It turned out that they were just so appreciative that they were seen and someone thought of them. The other thing I want to mention is I heard, not from everyone, but over 50% said that a lot of times people come and say, tell me what I could do for you. Tell me how I could help. And the person felt just too dazed or too guilty and wound up not asking. And they really appreciated when people just did things. They showed up at their house and said, hey, I made an extra casserole. Here it is. Or they came over and helped them clean their house or mowed their lawn, or said, oh, I'm going to the zoo today. I'd love to take your kids with me. And I'll tell you, I was someone who used to always say, tell me what I can do, because I figured people knew what they needed. So I would ask them and then do something that they actually needed. But after all these interviews for the book, I realized I can just go out and do something. Worst case scenario, I just did something and they didn't really need it. but they'd appreciate it. So something that's important for us to remember is that we won't know that what we did worked. So, story after story in my book, people said, I just didn't realize the impact I had, or I didn't realize at the time. There was Ricardo, where a 5-minute conversation changed his family's entire life. And I asked him, I said, Ricardo, what do you do for this guy who changed your family's whole life? And Ricardo said, at the time, I didn't realize that this was changing my life. He was a stranger. Every day I look for this guy so I could hug him and thank him. And in the meantime, I just do a kind act every single day in his honor. In Hebrew school, I was taught about tzedakah and the importance of giving anonymously, which is a wonderful practice, but it does make it difficult to hear the outcomes of our donation. But that's okay, because we do kind acts for the world. So I'd like to end with a quick exercise. If you could all get a pen and paper, that'll be helpful. All right, so I'm going to put an image on the screen. I'll need you to look at the image and remember everything that's read, but I'm trusting you. You can't write anything down until I say you can. So at this point, you're just looking and remembering everything that's read. It's only going to be up for a few seconds, so look very carefully. And if you give me a second, I will pull it up now. Remember, you'll need to remember all the red things. All right, here it is. Remember the red things, but don't write anything. Remember. All right, that was fast. So now please write down all the red things. All right, we got a smart group. I see everyone writing. All right, so you've got enough because everyone's got at least a few things down. Now I want you to write down everything you remember that wasn't red and was another color and what color it was. I now see one person writing. You are like every single group I speak with. And I teach a class. My students are more skeptical than most. They insisted I pull the picture back up to make sure there were other things. So I'm going to pull the picture back up in their honor so you can see that there are some other things here. We've got the globe, the desk, the chair, the fish tank, the night table, clothes on the floor, the bed, the closet. There's a bunch of stuff here. But we didn't see it. We see what we look for. And right now, there's so much tragedy in the world, and it's everywhere. All we have to do is turn on the news. And it can feel hopeless. Like, I know I watch the news and I see what's going on in the Ukraine. I just feel like I just can't do anything. And you see the news and you feel that way. But there's still a tremendous opportunity for us, for each of us, to improve the world. If every day we look around and say, how can I make someone's day today? We can do it with a thank you note, with a lesson in shoe tying, with a $45 donation, reaching out to a neighbor. We have to look for those opportunities and we'll find them. It's the embodiment of the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, right? As the rabbi spoke about at the beginning, we should repair the world with our actions. We might not know the impact we had on the world, but we will definitely feel the impact we have on ourselves. So I want to thank you for listening. Hopefully this was somewhat entertaining, and I'm open to any questions. If people have questions, happy to answer them, or anything that you'd want to talk about. You can put it in the chat or unmute yourselves, whatever you're comfortable with.
So, Brad, first, thank you, really. And one of the questions you actually, something I was going to ask you a little later on, but you just mentioned it, so I wanted to bring this up first. I know a lot of the things that you talk about have to do with things that we can do for other people in our lives or nearby, even people we don't know. And I'm wondering, and some of those are, that is much of that is accessible. We're able to do it, right? But what happens when we're in a situation we are now, where there are people on the other side of the planet who are in need, refugees, and I don't know if this is something that you've already spent time. I imagine some things have come to you because through your work. But any thoughts or ideas on, and we have a program later this week to talk about Ukraine, but any ideas that you've already vetted or have come to you that would be opportunities for people to do something for the refugees in and from Ukraine?
Yes. So at University of Pennsylvania, which is near us, there's the Center for High Impact Philanthropy. And these are researchers who just look at what is the most efficient way to spend money to help people. And they came out with a bunch of suggestions that are excellent of how we can help Ukraine and what nonprofits they think use the money best. Before we're done, I will put it in the chat because it's got to be in my browser cache because I've been there a few times. But that's a great way. That's a great place to start. And one other thing I'd say is, like, often with these things we have a fear, like, is my money going to be wasted? Is this the right thing? And we can't let that stop us. We have to make the best choice that we think, I believe, and just go with it, because every nonprofit is going to have trouble spending money 100% efficiently. But we can't wait forever. And no for-profit spends their money efficiently either. We just tend to have this unrealistic expectation of nonprofits. So that's another thought. And I just put the URL in there. So afterwards, if you want to look at it, I'm assuming this page hasn't changed since I looked at it last week. There were a bunch of really good Ukraine recommendations.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Beautiful. And I think we're all quite excited to check that link. I have to ask, the timing, separate from Ukraine, but the pandemic, it just aligns so powerfully with your book. And I'm wondering if you planned or what your timeline was for this book and the publishing time, because it just seems so timely right this very moment.
So it was random. And I remember when my publisher told me the publication date was April 14th. And I told them, I said, well, can we do it a different time? Because that's like the week taxes are due. There's going to be so much distraction and it'll take away from the book launch. And they said, nope, that's your publication date. Then a month before that, COVID happens, and all of a sudden everything gets shut down. So I called my publisher again. I said, look, we have all these bookstore events. The book's going to be in bookstores. No one can go anywhere. Maybe we should push the publication date back. They said, nope, we got other authors. Your date is your date. Thankfully, it still came out because it turned out that people needed the book more than ever during COVID. Like, what I heard was, this just helped me figure out ways to be helpful to others. And this really made me grateful and feel good about my life and to have faith in humankind. So I think it was a great time for the book to come out, completely unplanned. Thankfully, my publisher is much smarter than me. So the book still came out, even given my hesitation. It does make it harder because reaching people to tell them about your book is difficult when everyone's stuck inside. But I think it was the right time for the message and to inspire people to go out there and make our own differences.
Thank you. And I just have to say, I so appreciate that you opened with an opportunity for each of us to have just a tiny impact. I think, right, that reminder that it doesn't have to be hours or thousands of dollars, right? It can just be the tapping on your phone or the tapping into your keyboard. I think these things are so incredibly important. And as you noted, so deeply Jewish. I want to close with just so much gratitude for your time, for your wisdom, for the stories that you've shared and the inspiration that I think everyone here can draw from them. And maybe I'll turn it over to you and see if you have any questions for us before we end.
Yeah, I mean, I love, how I found stories for the book is pretty much I went around asking everyone I knew, what's like a small act of kindness that someone did for you that like was really meaningful? And those stories just make me feel great. So if anyone has a small act of kindness they want to share, like, you could feel free to talk about it or put it in the chat. I see Lori shared one about a day of kindness for his son Tommy on his first birthday after he died. And you know, I've talked to a lot of families that have done days of kindness in memory of a loved one who died, because what a nice way and a special way to honor them.
Thank you. And I invite anyone else to share as if you'd like in the chat. And Brad, just on behalf of Washington Hebrew Congregation, we just thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this, for putting it out into the world. You can feel that it has such an unbelievable impact. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun. I love sharing the message. There's another example in here. Yes, you know, Lauren, this is such a good point. I hear from people all the time that I'm afraid I don't know what to say, so I don't want to reach out to someone. And we don't need to say anything. People love us for who we are. So just being there and doing what we normally do makes such an enormous difference to people. And just being there, we don't have to say anything. And if someone says something and you don't know what to say, you say, thank you for sharing. I learned this as a teacher. I teach kids, and a lot of them have been through a lot of trauma. And they'll tell me things sometimes, and I ask them, like, what do you say? And like, you just say, thank you for sharing. And when I say that, like, and my students are young adults, they're like 18. They're like, you're welcome. I'm so glad I could share. It's the perfect thing because you're not going to know the right words, and we don't have to. So thank you, Lauren, for bringing that up, because that is such an important thing to remember. Just being there and being who we are is really important to supporting someone.
And if you're looking for additional tiny ways beyond just the texting somebody who has meant something to you, then we welcome you to visit Washington Hebrew Congregation's website. We have Mitzvah Day coming up. We have opportunities to learn about Ukraine. We have opportunities to help your own soul and spiritual journey through prayer, through learning, through engaging with others. Thank you so much for your time.
I also want to just add that that one of the really nice aspects of Brad's book is that at the back he has the Hall of Fame, the Humankind Hall of Fame, and I'm sure that's an ever-growing list. I mean, the book went to publication, but that list continues, and there may be some ideas in there of things to do. You know, ideas that, you know, even talking through some of them, I think, can be a nice way to talk through with children or grandchildren about things they might be interested in. And one of the things that we all know is that it's easier sometimes if it's something that's already a passion, if there's a way to use the passion and an interest and to share that with somebody else. So even whether it's talking about what some of those ideas are, and can you think of anything similar that you might do, but really it's about making those connections and building community, and that is such sacred work, and it is work that is never complete. And so I'm so thankful to you, Brad, for joining us this evening, and for giving us some additional tools and the inspiration and a reminder that any one of us can do just something small, and that makes a difference in building it in some way into the day, to express gratitude for what we have, but also being able to help somebody else to lift their spirits. So thank you for that and for your time. And thank you to all of you who joined us, both those of you who are with us right now and those of you who might be watching us later on. I encourage you to go to the link in the chat and to purchase Brad's book. I highly recommend it. It is so uplifting. And again, just a reminder of the power that we each have to have a positive impact on people in our lives, and even more so the people we don't know, but the ways in which we can make a difference. And so I'm excited to see all the ways that we're going to continue to bring this kindness out into the world, and to help heal it. So thank you again to Brad. Thank you to the Jewish Book Council.